It started with an email. No subject line, no sender name, just a link. Steph Curry almost ignored it. But when he clicked, he saw something that shouldn't exist, a forgotten YouTube channel from his college days. And then, buried among old videos of jokes and challenges, he found it. A video he didn't remember recording. A video that never should have been seen. Steph Curry had everything. For championships. 2 MVPs. A legacy that would place him among the greatest to ever touch a basketball. His career was winding down, but in the best way possible. He was still at the top, still feared by defenders, still rewriting the game with every deep three. The world saw him as a future Hall of Famer, a global icon whose name would echo in NBA history long after he retired. Life was perfect, until the email arrived. There was no subject line, no sender information, just a single link. At first, he almost ignored it. His inbox was always flooded, endorsement deals, sponsorship opportunities, media inquiries. But something about this one felt off. A gut instinct, a quiet itch at the back of his mind. He clicked. The link led to YouTube. But not just any video. A channel. His channel. For a moment, he didn't understand. The layout was unfamiliar, a relic from the past, untouched by time. And then it hit him. This was his old YouTube channel from college. He had completely forgotten about it. A time capsule from before the NBA, before the fame, before the world knew his name. The channel was filled with random, harmless videos, jokes, pranks, challenges, clips of him and his college friends messing around. He clicked on a few, laughing at how young he looked, how different life had been back then. But as he scrolled deeper, past the memories, past the nostalgia, he found something he didn't recognize. A video, one that had never been published. The thumbnail was blurry, almost glitched, like the system wasn't sure it should exist. The title? Untitled. No description. No views. Nothing about it made sense. His heart rate quickened slightly as he hovered over it. Something about it felt wrong, but curiosity won. He clicked play. The video was grainy, shaky, filmed on what must have been an old camcorder. It showed him and his friends sneaking around campus late at night, laughing, whispering, filming their own stupid version of a ghost hunting video. They were just kids, messing around, not realizing the weight of what they were about to capture. Then, the moment, the camera panned away from their group for just a second, moving through the darkness, tilting towards something happening in the distance. A shadowy meeting. Several men standing in a circle. One of them handed something to another, something small, metallic, money, a drive, a weapon. It was impossible to tell. The figures were mostly silhouettes, the only light coming from a dim street lamp behind them. But as the camera zoomed slightly, trying to focus, one of the men turned toward the lens. And even in the poor resolution, his face was clear. Steph froze. This wasn't just some random guy. This was someone he recognized. Someone powerful. The footage cut abruptly. The video ended. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his mouse, scrolling back, pausing on that single frame. He stared at the face, trying to make sense of it. He had seen this man recently, but not in any college memory. He had seen him on the news. At first, he tried to brush it off. It was probably nothing. Just some guys talking, maybe exchanging cash, maybe just some late-night business deal that looked more dramatic than it was. But then, things got strange. The next day, as he was leaving practice, he saw a man watching him from across the parking lot. A stranger, wearing a dark jacket, standing just far enough away to not be suspicious. But something about him felt off. The way he lingered. The way he was pretending not to look. Steph kept walking, telling himself he was overthinking. But then, that night, while scrolling through news articles, he saw the man from the video again. His face, now in high resolution, staring back at him from a business article. A billionaire. A powerful figure in finance and politics. Someone who had been involved in multiple scandals, but never caught. His stomach turned. He clicked out of the article, trying to convince himself this was all just coincidence. But then, an hour later, the video disappeared. Not just from the channel, from his entire YouTube account. And then his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated before answering, his breath slow, controlled. The voice on the other end was low, distorted, mechanical. Delete everything. Forget you saw it. This is your only warning. Then click. The call ended. A cold chill crept up his spine. Someone was watching him. Steph Curry had faced pressure before. Game 7s, hostile arenas, defenders who wanted nothing more than to see him fail. But this was different. This wasn't basketball. This wasn't a game. This was something deeper, darker, something lurking beneath the surface of his own past that he hadn't even known existed until now. The voice on the phone still echoed in his head, cold, mechanical, emotionless. Delete everything. Forget you saw it. This is your only warning. At first, he had almost convinced himself it was nothing. Just a prank, some hacker messing with his old account, some overzealous conspiracy theorist trying to scare him. But then, the video disappeared. Not just the one he had watched. The entire YouTube channel was altered. Videos were missing, some had their timestamps changed, and his login credentials no longer worked. Someone had gone in. Someone had erased everything. And it wasn't him. Steph barely slept that night, tossing and turning in his bed, his mind replaying everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The eerie voice, the missing video, the way his account had been wiped clean without a trace. He had spent his whole career controlling the uncontrollable, thriving under pressure, finding clarity when the world was screaming at him to panic. But this wasn't basketball. This was something else. The next morning, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. His heartbeat quickened as he hesitated, then answered. Silence. And then, the same voice as before, low, distorted, synthetic. You didn't listen. His grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? He demanded, trying to sound controlled. But there was a sharpness to his voice, a tremor just beneath the surface. A pause. You have no idea what you're caught up in. Walk away. Delete everything, or this doesn't end well for you. Click. The call ended. A cold sweat broke out along his neck. He swallowed hard, staring at the phone as if it could somehow give him answers. He opened his email. Nothing. Checked his YouTube again. Nothing. But then, something was missing. Several other emails had disappeared. At first, he thought maybe he had accidentally deleted them. Maybe they had just been buried under new messages. But when he checked his trash folder, they weren't there. The emails had been wiped completely, as if they had never existed. And they weren't just random emails. They were from people he trusted, his agent, his financial manager, his personal assistant. Someone was in his accounts. Someone was inside his life. At first, he thought maybe he was just being paranoid. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he was imagining things. But when he checked his phone logs, his stomach dropped. 2 calls were gone. Erased. Not just marked as missed, not just lost in a sea of other calls. Gone. And then, almost instinctively, he checked his home security footage. His system was good, state-of-the-art, motion sensors, cloud backups. But when he scrolled through the footage from the night before, he saw it immediately. A black SUV. It had been parked just across the street, engine off, headlights dim. It sat there for hours. No one got out. No one got in. It was watching him. Steph clenched his jaw, his pulse hammering against his ribs as he rewound the footage further. The SUV had been there the night before, too. And the night before that. He checked 3 nights ago. Still there. Whoever was in that car hadn't been following him. They had been stationed there, watching, waiting. Then he noticed something else. 3:42 a.m. The camera facing his front door flickered. For a brief second, a shadow moved into frame. It wasn't just a passing figure. It wasn't some lost neighbor. Someone had walked up to his house. But they hadn't knocked. They hadn't tried to break in. They had just stood there, right outside his door. A chill ran down his spine. He rewound the footage again, pausing frame by frame. He could barely make out the shape, tall, dark clothing, a hood. No identifying details. But the intent was clear. They wanted him to know they had been there. They wanted him to feel the threat. Just as the weight of it all settled in, just as Steph felt the first real shiver of fear slide down his spine, his phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. You're in trouble. But I can help you. His heart pounded in his chest. His fingers hovered over the screen. He wanted to ignore it. He wanted to pretend none of this was happening. But he knew better now. He typed back, "Who is this?" A response came almost immediately. Not important. What matters is that they know who you are. They know where you live. And they know what you saw. Steph exhaled sharply. He was being hunted. What was in that video? A longer pause. Then, you already know the answer. Another notification. An email. No sender. No subject. Just a file attached. Decrypted footage.mp4. Steph's stomach twisted. He didn't want to open it, but he had no choice. He clicked. At first, it was the same grainy footage of him and his friends joking around on campus. Then the camera panned toward the shadows. This time, the video was clearer. This time, he could see their faces. There were 5 of them. Suits. Dark clothing. Shadowed features. But one man was standing slightly apart, his face illuminated under the glow of a dim streetlight. Steph's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face. Not from college. From television. From business magazines. From global headlines. A billionaire. A man with deep connections in finance, politics, and corporations that ran the world. A man who, by all accounts, should have had nothing to do with a secret meeting caught on camera in 2007. And yet here he was. Steph felt his world tilt. His hands clenched in a fist as he leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was looking at. What had he just uncovered? What had he accidentally recorded that night? And most terrifying of all, what were they willing to do to make sure no one ever saw it again? Steph had spent his whole life proving people wrong. He had been counted out, doubted, dismissed, but he had never backed down. He had always fought, not because he had to, but because that's who he was. And this wasn't just about him anymore. If they were willing to go this far to hide the truth, what else had they done? What else had they buried? Who else had they silenced? He exhaled slowly, his mind racing through the consequences. If he leaked this, his life would change forever. He would no longer just be an NBA superstar. He would become a target, a symbol of something much bigger than basketball. Would the league stand by him? Would his sponsors drop him? Would his family be safe? The risk was unimaginable, but the idea of doing nothing was worse. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He opened a secure browser, connected to the VPN the hacker had sent him, and pulled up an encrypted messaging system. "How do we do this?" he typed. A response came almost instantly. "You're sure?" He took a breath. "I'm sure." It started as a whisper on the internet. A strange, low-quality video posted anonymously on an obscure forum. No title, no description, just a file labeled watch_this_now.mp4. At first, no one paid attention. Just another conspiracy. Just another grainy clip with no context. But then, someone enhanced the footage. Someone recognized the face. Someone made the connection. And then, all hell broke loose. News outlets picked it up within hours. Reddit threads exploded. Twitter turned into a battlefield of speculation, theories, accusations. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? Who were the men in the video? Why had it disappeared for years, only to resurface now? And then, they recognized Steph's voice. It was faint, barely audible under the static, but undeniable. The internet had a way of piecing things together, and soon, his name was everywhere. He hadn't planned to be part of the story, but now he was the story. That's when the real pressure started. Phone calls, emails, anonymous messages flooding his accounts. Some were from journalists desperate for a comment. Some were from people he didn't recognize, offering him protection, support, legal teams. But the most chilling ones? Silence. The men who had been following him, the black SUV, the break-ins, they stopped. The people who had been watching him, controlling his life from the shadows, they disappeared. That's when he knew. They weren't running. They were regrouping. The fallout was immediate. Some called him a hero. Some called him reckless. The NBA tried to distance itself, issuing vague statements about respecting personal privacy and focusing on the game. His sponsors pulled back, worried about controversy. Some brands didn't want their logo tied to someone who had just exposed one of the most powerful figures in the world. But the public? The public stood with him. Hashtags trended worldwide. His face was on every news channel. This wasn't just about an old video anymore. This was about power, corruption, control. And somehow, a kid who had just wanted to play basketball had found himself at the center of it all. Steph knew that life would never be the same. But as he watched the headlines roll in, as he saw the world wake up to something they were never supposed to see, he knew one thing for sure. He had made the right choice. and he would never regret it. Steph sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the television casting a cold glow across the walls. The news was still covering the fallout of the leaked video. Endless debates, panel discussions, legal analysts dissecting every angle of the conspiracy he had exposed. Some called him a whistleblower, a truth seeker. Others, including high-ranking officials and corporate executives, dismissed him as reckless, claiming he had misunderstood what he had uncovered. But the world had seen it now. There was no taking it back. He exhaled slowly, staring at the screen without really seeing it. His career, his legacy, his reputation, everything had changed. The game that had defined him, that had given him everything, felt so far away now. He wasn't just a basketball player anymore. He was something else. The weight of it pressed down on him. How close had he come to walking away? How close had he been to deleting the file, erasing every trace, pretending none of this had ever happened? It would have been easy. He could have ignored the first call. He could have dismissed the hacker's message. He could have convinced himself that his past didn't matter. But the truth had a way of catching up to you, no matter how fast you ran. The news droned on, but Steph barely heard it now. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, letting his mind drift. Maybe it was over. Maybe the silence from the people who had been following him meant they had given up. Maybe he could move on. Then his laptop's screen flickered. A notification popped up in the corner. New email. Steph straightened slowly. His pulse quickened, a dull thud in his chest. He reached for the mouse, hesitating for just a second before clicking. The inbox opened. No sender. No subject. Just a single message. A single link. His breath caught as his eyes locked onto the text beneath it. We're not done yet. The room felt colder. The silence heavier. Steph stared at the screen, 1,000 possibilities racing through his mind. He had thought the past was behind him. But now he realized this was just the beginning. The truth had a price. Steph had always known that. But he had never imagined just how steep the cost would be. He had spent his entire career proving people wrong, defying expectations, shattering records, and rewriting the game of basketball. Yet, in the end, none of that mattered. Not the championships, not the accolades, not the name he had built for himself. Because when it came down to it, the moment he chose to expose what he had seen, he became something else. A problem. A target. A man who had stepped into a war he never meant to fight. This wasn't just about a video. It was about control, power, silence. It was about the kind of truth that wasn't meant to be uncovered, the kind that people erased before it could ever reach the light. And yet here he was, standing in the wreckage of what his life used to be, watching the world react, feeling the walls close in. He had won, but at what cost? They had warned him. The calls, the messages, the break-ins, all of it had been a warning. A final chance to walk away, to pretend he had never found the video, to let the past stay buried. He could have taken that chance. He could have chosen his career, his family, his safety. He could have chosen silence. But that wasn't who he was. And now, there was no going back. The world was watching. The video had sparked investigations, lawsuits, political chaos. And yet, deep down, he knew the real fight hadn't even started yet. The people who had been exposed, the figures in the shadows, they weren't the type to just disappear. They weren't the type to let one man destroy everything they had built. They were waiting, regrouping, and soon they would strike back. Steph had always believed that the past was just that, the past. A memory, a chapter you could close, something you could walk away from. But he had been wrong, because no matter how far you run, no matter how much time passes, what you leave behind has a way of finding you again. He had forgotten about that night in college, forgotten about the video, forgotten about the faces in the shadows. But they had never forgotten him. They had been watching, and now they knew that he knew. Steph had spent his whole life playing fearless, taking shots no one else dared to take, believing in the impossible. But this wasn't a game. There was no final buzzer, no crowd cheering, no comeback waiting to happen. This was real, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had made the right move. But that was the thing about courage. It wasn't about feeling safe. It wasn't about knowing you would win. It was about standing up anyway, even when the fear was suffocating. even when you knew the cost. So, as he stared at the email on his screen, at the single message that made his blood run cold, he made his choice. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to hide. No matter what came next, not all ghosts come from the past. Some are watching you right now.